Talented.
Oh, okay. Okay. Got it.
Okay. So we'll count to 10
Okay, go
in
for it.
Swahili. In Swahili.
All right, do it.
No, you start.
Ein, zwei. No, I'm doing German. Go ahead.
Okay. So hi, hello to Kirsten Larson.
Hi, Mel. Thank you for having me.
You're one of my favorites. I mean, when I bring somebody back, that's a sign that I loved our first interview, and I did love our first interview. And it was one of the best read, best listened to, best watched interviews I've done. And here we are again. And I'm in
Yay.
Israel, and you're somewhere between Los Angeles and San Francisco.
Yes, where it's very wet and wintry.
And yeah, so welcome to the, let's see if I get it right, the Children's Literature Channel of the New Books Network, which I am fortunate to host. And I am fortunate, as you can imagine, to interview this wonderful author. Kirsten, you have a new book out and we're celebrating.
Yay. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Show everybody the book.
Oh, yep.
That was the prompt. You have a new book coming up.
Sorry.
We'll do it again. We'll do it again. Kirsten, we're here to celebrate your new book.
Hooray. All right. Here it is. Woo. All right. This is The Fire of Stars. It's the life and brilliance of the woman who discovered what stars are made of. It is illustrated by the amazing Katherine Roy, which is why you see this gorgeous cover. Or if you're not watching us, you can go check it out wherever you buy books. This is from Chronicle Books. And what makes this book unique is it's two stories being told at the same time. So it's the story of astrophysicist Cecilia Payne Gaposchkin after she married later in her life. And it's also the story of how a star is born. And those two stories are told side by side simultaneously on every spread with a linking line of text that unites the two stories. So it's a book that can be read a number of different ways.
Wonderful. And now is the time to open the book for our watching audience.
Okay, watching audience.
Okay. We also have a podcast. The people who can't see the book, it's a marvelous book. It's gorgeous. It's so well written. Run out and buy it today.
Yeah, so that and you can you can see it wherever books are sold. But for those who are watching, what you'll notice is on every 2-page spread, you'll see the star story and you'll see Cecilia's story, her formation as a scientist. And then on each spread, there's like this linking line of text. So for young readers, maybe they just read this short line of text and you can read that all across the book, or you can read Cecilia's story. Right? You can read the additional information that pertains to Cecilia. And it's like that on every single spread. So the stories are united and they're following the same arc. So, I mean, Katherine, I just can't even tell you how glorious her work is on this book. And she also has some great resources for like helping kids make some of these star designs that she created. She shares and shares her process for that. So anyway, it's a really cool book. 2 stories, multiple stories in one. 2 stories.
And lots of back matter that parents and librarians love.
Yes, because I mean, somebody once asked me, like, what did you have to leave out of this book? And in reality, I left out pretty much Cecilia Payne Gaposchkin's entire career, because what I was most interested in this book was her formation as a scientist, starting with her curiosity as a child and her persistence. So I end the story essentially with her dissertation, which she wrote. It was a groundbreaking dissertation, which she wrote at the age of 25. And then she had an entire career at Harvard that spanned decades. But I left all of that out because I was just interested in her focus on this thrill of discovery and finding something new. So the back matter is where you get to learn the rest of the story. So, there's a whole timeline of her career and her life that ends with her death in 1979. And you'll find things like kind of little thumbnails. I go through and talk about like how a star is born, using the thumbnails and lines of text from each page, and then elaborating on that process. And of course, there's like an author's note, which talks a little bit about her discovery and her work. So there's lots of back matter.
She was a contemporary of Einstein.
Yes. And in fact, she was, one of her pivotal moments was she went to see a lecture by Arthur Eddington, who essentially was kind of proving Einstein's theories with a solar eclipse project that he was working on. And when she went to that lecture, that was sort of her first introduction to this whole idea of astrophysics. And that really, she was always interested in the natural world, but she was on a sort of biology life science track. And then when she heard that lecture, she says she wrote down every word of the lecture from memory. And that is when she was introduced to astrophysics, and she was like, this is it. And she switched her studies to focus on that. And that was really sort of a pivotal moment for her.
But she helped create a field that really didn't exist.
Yes.
You talk about astrophysics, but it really wasn't until her era. And she starred. You like that?
I like that.
She starred back in the day when women were not given PhDs. I mean, it's crazy.
Well, she couldn't even get. She did not. I mean, they have their own little degree structure, I mean, it's just so fascinating, and even then she worked at Harvard for years. And I mean, she had these, I don't remember the exact titles, but she had like, lecturer type titles, and it was forever until she became a full professor of astronomy and then was named, department chair. So I mean, it was a different era, but we're in Women's History Month, right? So what a great opportunity to celebrate some of these unsung women in all sorts of fields.
Okay. One of the great things about her and your book is that whether she was a woman or a man, she had a great discovery that was trashed at the beginning.
Right.
So I don't want to make this an interview about Cecilia Payne, but just a few words about trashing people's ideas at the beginning.
Yeah, well, I think, she was following the trail of evidence, which is what scientists are supposed to do, right? You follow the evidence. And her evidence basically said, stars are mostly hydrogen and helium. And guess what? These are the most abundant chemicals in our entire universe. But conventional thinking of the day was, well, stars must be a lot like Earth. They must have a lot more of these Earth minerals. And
Kirsten,
so
this goes back thousands of years.
Yeah. Yes.
And Copernicus and Galileo, who believed that the sun was the center of the solar system.
Right. So we come to science with preconceived notions, and so this is and it's difficult always when there's a new idea that flies in the face of what we thought was true, but she's following the trail of evidence. And so basically, the conventional scientists of the day were pretty much like, this cannot be true. And then a few years later, they had to come back around and say, you know what, she was right. She was right. Sadly, it took the famous astronomers of the day saying that before everybody believed her, but she was following the trail of evidence. So her advice, and everybody's advice is when you have a breakthrough and when you have the evidence, you need to stick to your guns, essentially, like stick to your convictions. And don't be dissuaded by people who are telling you are wrong when your evidence is right. But I think that also, that also applies for authors too, right? When we're trying to work, or
Hold on,
illustrators.
hold on. So before we get to authors, you reminded me of Thomas Kuhn and paradigm shifts. That it's not enough to discover something; you also have to convince the big wigs in the scientific community that you're actually right, following the evidence. Now let's talk about. This is a good time now to segue to literature.
Okay, but real quick before you say that, but I think that is an imperative part of science, is communication, that people don't understand. A big part of science is how the science gets shared, and convincing your fellow scientists, having them go back in and look at your work, and if it's pertinent, replicate your experiments or whatever. That is such a critical piece of the scientific process that I think a lot of people don't necessarily, non-scientists don't.
Do you realize how crazy this interview is? I was a scientist for 40 years trying to be a children's book writer. And you're so perspicacious and so knowledgeable about scientific discovery. And in our last conversation, you said a lot of things that resonate with me. A year later, let the kids ask questions, go out and explore. This is what I teach my students and children.
Well, and when I work with writers, this is what I teach writers, because this book would not have come together in this way if I hadn't stayed curious and continued to be open to new ways of thinking about my draft. Because I did not, when I first wrote the draft for this book, it was
this was your idea, not the editor?
Oh, to tell the story in this way?
Yeah.
No, this is my idea.
Wonderful.
Yeah. No, because when I initially wrote this book, I wrote it using a very traditional 3-act structure, just focused on Cecilia Payne, right? And in fact, my agent and I, we were just finalizing it to go out on submission, and it was just Cecilia's story. Then I had sort of a serendipitous moment, which was at the time I was working as a blogger on a blog called Subic Club. And we had a series called Query Letters That Worked. And so a writer friend of mine, Hannah Holt, shared a query for her book, what came to be called The Diamond and the Boy. So this was 2017. Her book did not come out until 2018. Had never seen the manuscript, but she shared her query letter for this series. And her vision for her book was different than how it turned out, but she had this idea of telling 2 stories: the story of making synthetic diamonds and how diamonds are formed, and how the scientist who created synthetic diamonds was formed as a scientist. And she had this idea of telling one story from the beginning of the book, one story from the back of the book, and they meet together in the middle with a shared line of text. So I saw that in her query letter, and I was like, "Ooh, this is interesting. Maybe I should start thinking about my story in a different way." And I thought, I wonder if I could tell the story of Cecilia Payne and the story of star formation. But what kept resonating with me was this idea of a shared line of text. And so I thought, could I have like a shared line of text on every page and tell the 2 stories at the same time on every spread? So it was really serendipitous that I read her query letter, and that it sparked me to think about, my story in a new way at the 11th hour. I was supposed to be going out on submission.
I love that it sparked your idea. Hannah has been on the show, and she's wonderful. And the story of the artificial diamonds are very close to her heart.
Yes. Yeah. She's got a family connection to Tracy Hall. So
absolutely. Yeah. So absolutely. So now this is very strange, because I'm interviewing somebody who's so knowledgeable and keen on science. Last year we had an interview. So we talked about the invention of the airplane, also by a woman. But more intriguing for me was a nonfiction book he wrote about a fictional character.
Yes, a true wonder. We talked about a true wonder.
Yes, and so you have this ability to see things differently, and I'm guessing that you might have been a scientist, and it's perhaps not too late.
Well, I think, I think that's what I think I am not interested in doing the same old thing over and over again. That to me, telling stories in a very traditional way is not that interesting to me. So, I'm constantly interested in finding new ways to share stories. So in A True Wonder, we used like a comic book type format, and it was interesting to me because it wasn't a biography of a person. As you said, it was sort of a biography of a fictional character, and how Wonder Woman was created and how she came to mean so much to so many people. So I think I'm always, it ends up meaning that I have a very slow process. I have a book right now that I have, a picture book that I know there's something there, and I've written and rewritten it so many different ways, but I can't let go of it. And I'm trying to find just the right sort of different way of telling the story.
So let's go back to the submission process. Now,
Mhm.
if you are an unagented writer and you're submitting something that's weird, goes from the front to the back, it's in English and Arabic at the same time. They meet in the middle. One page is upside down. You can have tremendous trouble selling that concept to an agent who expects to get a linear draft of a picture book of less than 500 words. But you were lucky to have an agent, and you're also famous. But still, how did the book look like on the page? How did the submission look like? Was this page split down the middle?
Okay, so I will say we are traditional. We are told as authors not to include art notes, right? We're often told to leave the art to the illustrator, which is totally true. I mean, they have such amazing visual storytelling skills, and you don't want to mess with their process. But a lot of our job as authors is to make our vision clear. So often what that means for me is I have to write sort of a global note at the beginning of my manuscript that says, hey, here's my vision for the story. With A True Wonder, it was, hey, I think this would be really cool told in comic book format with panels. For The Fire of Stars, it was, hey, I think what I would like to see is, we're telling two stories on every spread, the Star story and Cecilia's story, with a linking line of text. So a lot of my manuscripts contain a global illustration note. And then for this one, it was just a single Word doc. I didn't put anything into columns, but I did have illustration notes, and I did say, here's the line of text that applies to both stories. Here's what's happening with the star, and here's what's happening in Cecilia's life. I didn't get specific.
Kirsten, here's the
Mhm,
question.
mhm.
Could you do this if you weren't agented, if you were just submitting? In our previous talk, you came out as one of the authors who found an agent via the slush pile. Of
Right.
course, you had a wonderful biography, a history of writing dozens of books, and so perhaps any agent reading your bio would want to take you. And I remember the story of you being transferred to Lorien and her becoming
Mhm.
here, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you're right.
But would that be something you would submit? You submitted to Karen Weissman, I can't remember now. And would you say to an author starting out, perhaps to submit something simpler, because agents, if they look at your manuscript, they're going to look at it for a couple of seconds at the beginning.
Well, I mean, okay, I'm not here's what I would say. Your job as the author is to make your vision known. If you have like a more conceptual story or one that's reliant on a visual narrative that's not apparent from your words, you need to make your vision known. In my view, art notes are for the agent, they're for the editor. The editor, in fact, I don't even know if Katherine ever saw those notes. They may, a lot of times, the editor needs the notes to see the vision and to help you achieve your vision. And then they very well may take those art notes out before they give the manuscript to an illustrator. So I like to think of the art notes as getting your vision across to the agent and the editor. They're not necessarily for the illustrator. And I like Tara Lazar's thinking about art notes as action notes, right? So if there's something that's not apparent in your story that's taking place, an action that needs to be include it. But you don't need to see things like, Cecilia Payne's dress is yellow, blah, blah, blah. All that to say, if I were submitting now, I would not shy away from submitting, a conceptual story that requires a note about your vision, as long as you can make your vision clear. That's my personal view. But I am not counseling people on submissions.
In a sense, you are. We've had agents on the program, we've had editors on the program. I just came back from the SCBWI in New York, and there's no message one size fits all. So,
and I think, I think people, I think especially if you're writing biography, we've had a lot of biography. So I think if you're writing biography, you want to try something different. I think editors want to see something distinct and different. I will say, the more I've been creative with my structure and things like that, those manuscripts have ended up being easier to sell, or have sold in less time than a more traditional manuscript.
But Kirsten, it's you see, you are one of we had this discussion already. 1 in 3,000 manuscripts in a slush pile gets published. This isn't me saying this. This is Elizabeth Law quoting. It was done at Holiday House from another talk.
Right.
So 1 out of 3,000, and you're one of those 3,000 that were picked up from the slush pile. So in science, every author that I speak to is an outlier, and statistics don't work with outliers. So whatever you say that works for you is wonderful, and it's instructive. I want to ask you now a few more questions about the process of this book. Okay.
Sure.
Did you help to pick the illustrator? Did the illustrator speak to you during the illustration?
Sure.
Did you see the illustrations?
Yeah. Okay. Real quick. Sorry. I have a senior dog who is going crazy. So if you hear barking, I apologize.
My audience loves barking dogs.
Okay. So this is a hard manuscript to illustrate, and it took us 2 years to find an illustrator. I do not know, I don't know why different illustrators didn't take the project, but it took us 2 years before Katherine Roy signed on to the project. In terms of, did I have input? I'm publishing with Chronicle, and Chronicle makes beautiful, beautiful books. They have a really artistic sensibility. So I knew Melissa Manlove, our editor, would have tremendous, vision for who a good illustrator might be. And so Chloe, I'm sorry, she's having a meltdown. So, she had tremendous vision. So when she said, I think Katherine Roy would be great for this project, I said, sure. I'm very familiar with Katherine's work. So I said, yeah, let's get Katherine on board. And Katherine, she writes and illustrates her own books. She loves research. And so she went off and did her own research. I mean, she got research from Harvard, she does tremendous visual research. So she did her own research process. I communicated with her one time to check one fact. But she did all her own illustrations. I did see some of the preliminary dummies. But really my connection with her was only after we were done with the book and went to market it. So she was doing her own work independently.
So if you pick up the book, there's a can you pick up the book and open a double spread, please?
Sure.
There's something incredible about her illustrations.
Yeah.
And I think that you answered, first of all, you answered your own question. You've given, no, don't go away. When the illustrator sees there's so much research done before they can grab, pencil and a crayon and start to draw, or in this case, whatever techniques she used. Some artists just want to draw. They don't want to do the research. Right. Okay, open it again.
Mal, you're so funny.
You're funny. Yeah, this is a good page. Now,
okay, hold on 1 second. I'm shutting the door on this dog. Hold on one second. Sorry, Mel.
All right. It's all right. I'm going to sing Hava Nagila as I do when I run out of things to say. Hava Nagila, Hava. Okay, you're back. So
sorry, my fluffy little dog has dementia, and so she's having a moment. Okay.
Okay. So one of the I don't know anything about artists and so on, but one of the things that struck me in this book is how we're instructed as authors to leave a lot of space in picture books for the illustration. The illustrator creates the book as much as we do, sometimes more, right?
Right.
And what she's done, and I don't know anything about art, but I find this incredible, is that the artwork is very detailed, except for the facial expressions, which are minimal. And for me, I don't know anything, but it says to me, this is like letting the reader kind of invoke the face.
Oh, now this
Cecilia.
is interesting. This is interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, and this is Katherine's style. So if you look at her other books, like she has Otis and Will Discover the Deep with Barb Rosenstock, she has a very loose style, so but
yeah,
that's
but
interesting. That's interesting.
We have to have her on the show. Ask Katherine if she'll be on the show, and we could both interview her.
Well, she has a book out next week, another book.
Well, let's do it. I mean, I booked till July, but for you I can make a special dispensation. Please ask Katherine. All
right.
So this I find really intriguing. It's almost
yeah. So kids can sort of see themselves in the. Yeah, I love it.
Or whatever, or fill out her face.
Well, and the interesting thing, it's Katherine and I have done some written interviews together, and we did speak to some folks at Harvard one time. But she'll say for this book, she sort of had to come to a point where she could develop a whole new process for the stars, because how do you draw a star forming? You really can't, and so she had to use toothbrushes and make, interesting marks and splatters, trying to represent the feeling and the energy of, a star forming. So it was kind of an interesting, we have both had an interesting experience, with kind of creating things in a new way.
And you have can you talk about your book coming out next year? Your concept book?
Well, I have a couple of books. I'm the announcement.
Okay.
The picture book.
I'm being specific here. This is how it's already in the public knowledge. Yes. Can you share a few words about this book?
Yeah, so I have a picture book coming out with Little Brown called "This Is How You Know." It will be illustrated by Cornelia Li, who's amazing, and we call that book a lyrical love letter to science. starting with sort of this, magic and wonder and curiosity. And for me, I think what I was sort of frustrated with was this very linear process that we teach children of the scientific method, where you do experiments and you gather data, and there's no room for failure. There's no room for having to repeat steps when things don't work out, or a new question comes up and you go off in a new direction. So I think I wanted to sort of really give kids a sense of how science really works. And so it's basically a free verse poem about how the scientific method really, really works. But it's, it's lyrical, it's lovely, it's sort of wondrous.
I'm gonna have to break the rules and have you on again next week. But Kirsten, look how marvelous this is. You see, because you are a scientific romantic.
Mhm.
And as somebody who was a scientist for 40 years, I can tell you that people who are in the profession become very jaded and very dogmatic. And looking back at my career, I was much more successful than I deserved to be. And there's reasons for this. We won't go into them today, but because I'm interviewing you. But everything in science is mistakes and
Yes.
chance observations and getting things wrong and baking the cookies backwards and blowing up a laboratory and tasting your finger because you want to flip a page and discovering saccharin. And I agree with you. I'm your biggest proponent now.
Well, but I think
that science is not it's a haphazard process.
Yes. Well, but I think what's interesting to me and why I write about this a lot is I feel like writing is the same way. I mean, I feel like making music is similar, visual art process, writing process. I think a lot of times we tell people, are you left brain? Are you right brain? Are you scientific or are you creative? But I think what I see is we all share a similar process, right? To create something new, whether it's a scientific discovery, whether it's an airplane, whether it's a comic book character, a picture book, we all go through a very similar haphazard process of trial and error and failure. And, so for me, I think that's why I keep sort of writing about that over and over again, is because I see what I do in that process as well.
But you see, so this is really interesting because I keep saying that, but it is truism, bad. Avoid truisms in interviews. It's splendid because we really are coming at writing like a scientist.
Yeah.
Because you're building. Hold on, you're building on stuff that is known or considered to be known. Whether it's a biography of pain, whether it's the process that you're discussing now with me, whether it's the scientific method, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm taking exactly the opposite journey. I'm trying to get away from science, and we talked about this a year ago, and now I'm going to bug you about it because it's been another year.
Okay, go ahead.
When are you going to publish a real fiction picture book that is not based on Wonder Woman, that's not based on stars, that's not based on Cecilia Payne? I'm now throwing it up to you.
You know what? I mean, I don't really have one. I mean, what the picture book that I'm struggling with right now, I have written it both as nonfiction and a fictional book that illustrates the concept I'm trying to get across. And when I've shared it with my agent, she's like, no, I think the nonfiction approach is better. So,
but she's not looking, she's looking at what is qualitatively better or what she can sell. Because I think I'm going to have Melissa Stewart on the show in a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. And we're going to have a very nice, friendly argument.
Yeah, she's great. Okay, go ahead.
About fiction versus nonfiction. Mm-hmm. I think that it's easier to sell nonfiction. What do you think?
Okay, I don't want to answer that question. Here's what I want to answer about that. But again, I am working on a middle grade fantasy. right? So I am writing, it's historical fiction fantasy, right? I've been working on that for a year, a novel, which is hard and new for me, which is why I'm so slow with it. But I think, personally, I think they're, again, sort of like scientists and writers or creators, artistic creators. I think we have fiction and nonfiction. I think we have more there's more in common with that than different, right? We're trying to share a truth, but we're sharing it in a different way. In fiction, there's a lot of emotional truth, and in nonfiction, it's a lot of sort of factual truth. But we're both trying to share some kind of truth. We're just coming at it a different way. So I guess I don't see that much different between fiction and nonfiction.
Let me tell you the difference.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Because people ask me, why did you leave a scientific career after 30, 40 years and want to write all kinds of complete fiction about a goat who wants to pitch in the major league? And there's a reason, because scientists look for a truth. You call it a physical truth, okay? Fiction writers look for everything except the truth. The truth is boring when you're writing fiction.
But I think you're looking for an emotional truth, right? You're looking
for that's beautiful. So you're looking for an emotional truth. But the other thing that I want you to consider, and we'll talk about this next year if you don't want to answer me in the meantime, is that as a scientist, you are charged with trying to understand the world as it is.
Right.
When you're writing fiction, you're trying to understand the world as it isn't. You create a world. When you create a character, 1 second, hold on, I'm on a roll.
Okay.
Okay. When Wonder Woman was created, she didn't exist. Now I'm going to shut up.
Well, no, but I think in some of writing fiction, even if you're creating a world and you're creating fictional characters, you're still wrestling with the world and how it is on an emotional level, not with the specifics of the characters in the world, but you're still wrestling with real world themes and real world issues and feelings that we all have. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about an emotional truth. So even in a very fictional world with magic or unicorns or whatever, at the end of the day, you're going to have some kind of a theme or a takeaway that's an emotional truth that is true. It's just a different type of truth. But all that to say, I am not currently working on fiction picture books. I am working on a middle grade historical fantasy. So that's fiction, but I'm not working on a picture book length fiction. Don't ask me. That's one. I don't know why.
We need some stuff to discuss next year.
Well, I mean, I have 2 books. I just don't, it's so hard to know exactly when they're going to land. I have 2 books in the pipeline.
Maybe we didn't talk much about this last time, but I did ask you what you were like as a 5-6-year-old. I have this theory that people who write for very young children are stuck at that age, that something happened to them, that essentially, I'm an old Jewish guy, but in my heart, I'm a 5-year-old in Ottawa. And I write to my 5-year-old self. Do you write to your 5-year-old Kirsten?
I don't think I write to my 5-year-old Kirsten, but I do think in sort of another lifetime, I was very interested in science. I mean, I remember writing a paper in the 9th grade about neutrinos, right? When neutrinos was like a fairly, I don't know, not, particle physics, whatever. But I think I had this conception that to be a scientist, you had to be a certain way. You had to be really brilliant at math and all of these things. And so I was very interested in science, but I think I also had this impression that I couldn't do science. And so
because 1 second, because you were a woman, because why?
Well, no, I just thought, I think I thought that you had to be very brilliant in math and in your science courses. As I've come to write about science, what I've learned is you don't have to be brilliant. You have to be able to do a certain amount of the math, but the math is actually, for a lot of people, the math is not as significant. My husband's an engineer. Does he remember everything about calculus? No, but he knows enough, he remembers enough that he can do his work. So I think part of it for me is I want kids to be encouraged. I want them to not be discouraged because they look at Einstein, right? Who is truly, wow, a brain. How do you do that? But we don't all have to be, if you're interested in science and engineering, you don't have to be like Einstein, right? So I want kids to be encouraged and know that their curiosity and wonder and persistence and perseverance is enough, and that they could do this. They could do science, they could do engineering.
Okay, Kirsten, 1 second. So are you talking to yourself here?
Yes, I mean
because
yeah.
you, if there were another Kirsten who was able to reach you, then perhaps you would have realized that you could have been a scientist. And I'm guessing that you would have been a marvelous scientist because you have, well, because you're so creative. I agree so much with your contention that it's all the same. Science and music and writing, I've dabbled in all of them, and it's the same creative process. But it's what I call thinking between the boxes, taking things that shouldn't be connected. Like what you've done. Having the stars together with the lady who discovered what they were made of.
Right.
And this is what scientists do. So maybe you are. I don't want to be a psychologist, but maybe you're comforting another Kirsten. And
yes. Yeah, I mean, there, in our alternative universes, I'm sure there is one where I'm a scientist or an engineer.
No, listen, you taught me something. You always teach me things. This I wish you lived in the same town. We could have coffee. This idea of looking for an emotional truth is so beautiful. So I'm going to urge you to think about that a little bit more too, because if writing fiction is looking for the emotional truth, and maybe this is what I'm trying to do after 35 years of trying to look for the physical truth, right? Then you should be able to say, I'm a big girl now. Enough writing about science and the scientific process. I should be writing more about the emotional truth. And perhaps this book that's coming out next year, which I can't wait, which is called This Is How You Know, may address that. And if not, I'm going to bug you every year until you.
Well, Mel, I'm writing a novel.
Yes.
So for me, I guess when it comes to emotional truths, right? I want a bigger stage, right? I want a richer tapestry. So I don't want to do that in a picture book. I want to do that in a novel.
No, okay, but the novel is for what age group?
It's middle grade.
Okay, so middle grade is what, 8 to 12?
8 to 12. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so maybe that's where you're stuck. Maybe that's the emotional truth, Kirsten, that you're addressing.
So probably.
I can't wait to see that. Is there anything else we haven't touched upon?
I don't think so. I just always want to let people know that there are resources on my website. So if you've enjoyed the discussion that we have, Katherine and I put together some teacher tips with discussion points that you can have, teachers or parents can have with their kids. Those are on my website, which is kirstenwlarson.com. And you'll find more resources for the book, all kinds of scientific activities. And then I'm on social media everywhere at Kirsten W. Larson. And I love to interact with readers and writers.
And you are marvelous. You're by far the most popular interviewee that I've had. And when I grow up, maybe we'll write a book together.
And that would be fun.
And I will be a scientific raccoon on one side of the page, and you'll interview me about science.
There you go. I think we have to do that one as a graphic novel. I'm feeling that one as a graphic novel.
You're the one who's successful here as a writer, not me.
Well, this is always a blast. I love that we get to go into so many different areas. It's always fun.
Kirsten, I can't help it. And I really think that that's how innovation and creativity happens.
Yes.
The more boxes you have to throw around and think in between, the more chances you have of coming up with something special. You're a very special guest on the show. That we've been going now for 3/4 of an hour. I think that this one was much better than our last one. What do you think?
All right. Yay. I'm glad we succeeded.
No, but you think this is a better interview than last one?
I don't know. I haven't listened to our other interview for a while. I'm sure they're both.
It was great too. Okay, here's to next year. So this has been a wonderful interview with the amazing Kirsten Larson, who has a new book just out, The Fire of Stars.
Yes.
The double barrel tale.
That's right. Two stories in one.
And it's like you buy one book and you get two stories.
Exactly. Two for the price of one. Mm-hmm.
With so much back matter and so much science and really, I wouldn't say like bringing to life a really important scientist that is sometimes forgotten. And congratulations on so many things that you do, Kirsten. And until we write our book together, this is Mel Rosenberg for the Children's Literature Channel of the New Books Network. What a mouthful. Saying thank you very much. Run out and buy Kirsten's new book. It's everywhere. And I can't wait till our next interview.
Thank you, Mel.
Thank you, Kirsten. Don't forget to speak to Katherine. We'll both interview her.
All right, sounds good. I'll let her know.
Absolutely. Well, don't let her know. Maybe you should ask her first. You know what? You're right. Just let her know. Mel, you're on the what are you doing next Thursday?
You know what? I'll email you and connect you both.
Wonderful. This was wonderful. I don't want to leave you, but I have to. Thanks so much, Kirsten.
Bye, Mel.
Bye, everybody.